So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Cropped Out, the curious tale of the BBC, Brexit and our missing vegetables. So this is a Byline Times article. It's really good. The shortage of vegetables in the UK has been noticed in Europe, with serious newspapers publishing articles about how Britain's supermarkets are limiting the number of peppers, cucumbers and tomatoes that customers can buy, featuring photos of extensive gaps on the shelves. And that's only if you can find those vegetables, then your purchases are limited. Germany's Der Spiegel, for example, ran a long article about the shortages, noting the bad weather in Spain and Morocco. The article cited the National Farmers Union view that, quote, increased costs, trade barriers by Brexit and a lack of staff, end quote, were to blame, and of course the staff shortages that were at least partly a consequence of Brexit. So there is a shortage. There are, quote, global issues, yes, but partly, the UK has been impacted more because of, exporting to the UK has increased costs and paperwork. So why would you export to the country with all of the barriers versus the ones where there are no barriers and no costs? On the UK production, I say no costs, limited costs. On the UK production end, a lack of staff made worse with no freedom of movement and the highest prices for energy in the world. Domestic production is flagging and imports are lacking. A bad combo, the Wombo combo, as my friend would say. The author says he lives in Germany and there's no obvious shortage of vegetables there. The supermarkets near, I'll quote him directly, the supermarkets near my home in Munich are fully stocked, though I have noticed the prices have risen, and there is something that Der Spiegel also picked up on. German traders say there have been a rise in prices and more are likely. But there are no actual shortages in Germany or apparently anywhere else in Europe. And I think the price increase thing is quite key here. I've also heard from some people, someone in Bavaria, a member of the audience, who keeps telling me about the tomatoes there. Now, Germany would import most of its tomatoes just like the UK would, so why is there no shortage there? As an illustration of this, Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 war correspondent, tweeted a picture of a supermarket shelves full of tomatoes, cucumbers and peppers and wrote, quote, no tomato shortage here, but I'm in Kherson, a frontline Ukrainian city that gets shelled by the Russians daily, not a British supermarket, end quote. And this one I can't comprehend properly. Clearly it's not just a Brexit issue, it seems to be something else in play as well, given obviously that Ukraine, I think, has an enhanced deal with the EU, but isn't part of the single market or the customs union. It's not a full EU member or an EFTA member. But we have suppliers that have shops within Ireland that have vegetables, and we do not in Great Britain. I think M&S would be one of them that have shops within Ireland that are stocked with tomatoes. So there's an issue here. It's a mixed picture for sure, but not that mixed, if that makes sense. Clearly, one thing's weighting more than the other. The whole of Europe has had to cope with the consequences of bad weather, but only the UK. He says only the UK, the author, but it's only Great Britain that's had the impacts of Brexit on top, and Britain only has empty shelves. Again, that's true. So how has the BBC reported on the fallout from Brexit? By not mentioning Brexit. So the BBC website, for example, seems to have settled on the stock phrase, quote, bad weather has disrupted supplies of fresh fruit and veg, and we rely on from overseas at this time of the year, and British growers have been planting fewer crops like tomatoes and cucumbers because of the huge heating costs for greenhouses. They're also struggling to find seasonal labour to pick them, end quote. And what this is this a lie by omission, because other countries are not seeing the shortages we are. So the question is, why is Great Britain an outlier? I've read that supermarkets don't want to pay more to suppliers or to change the agreements they have with them in terms of pricing structures. But then you have to argue that supermarkets want empty shelves, which makes no sense. With the seasonal labour shortage, it goes back predominantly to Brexit. Former chief executive of Sainsbury's, Justin King, who agreed there had been, quote, terrible weather, end quote, but added, quote, to understand the problem, you have to go back further. This is a sector that has been significantly disrupted by Brexit, end quote. He went on to talk about the huge grower of vegetables, the Kent-based Thanet Earth, and how the lack of government help over fuel costs has been a significant factor over the company not being able to afford to heat its greenhouses. The business presenter, though, was insistent, quote, but as you say, this is down to global pressures, ellipses. So that's the primary issue here rather than Brexit, end quote. And we've talked about this before. It was a huge greenhouse area. I think this is the one they're referring to. The salad bowl of the UK, it was called. I think you have farmers planting less here due to the costs and lack of staff, which, the staff goes back to Brexit. The costs of energy, I'm not sure about because we're out of the EU's internal energy market. But again, I haven't properly had time to look into that. Some of these farmers sold off their land to developers. That supply of certain foods will be lower year on year, especially the more they sell up. At the heart of this, the BBC's conviction that it's not its job to tell its audience when they are being lied to is that it confines itself to, quote, balance. Quote, he says this, but she says that, end quote. These narratives that often lead to viewers and listeners confused and inclined to believe that all sides are as bad as each other. And I want to say the BBC has a neutrality bias, i.e. they make everything 50-50, like good sides and bad sides, etc. But that's not true. That's not what they've done for a long time now. They often follow the government tagline and omit certain details. Brexit's impact would have been mentioned in passing, or at least asked to certain politicians, is Brexit a factor? But they have not done that, as far as I'm aware, and don't really do that. If you're playing the 50-50 game, you have to mention Brexit. When they say, oh, it's not Brexit, you say, oh, okay, fine. But they haven't really been doing that at all. Koonsberg, probably the most notorious example of this, interviewed the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn, who observed that Boris Johnson had lied. And in response to that, Koonsberg said, quote, that's quite a charge, end quote. By any realistic assessment, Johnson is a liar. Johnson a liar is not a, quote, charge. It is a statement of demonstrable fact. At the heart of this is the BBC's conviction that it's not its job to tell audience when they are being lied to. Instead, it confines itself to, quote, balance. Quote, he says, she says. The problem is that it is the job of journalists to tell people the truth, be it a panel show host or whatever your job is, to give people the truth as best you can. Mehdi Hasan is pretty good at this, not letting people spout nonsense opinions and half-truths, etc. Doing this is not journalism. If that's what you do, then hand back your credentials and let someone else do it. If you're out here, letting people get away with demonstrable lies that are clear lies here, you're not doing your job. The BBC's pursuit of an illusion of balance when reporting domestic politics has badly damaged it in its age of Brexit. Its obvious fear of telling British people the truth about what has been done to them and falling back on the cowardly reporting of contradictory opinions rather than hard facts has seriously undermined its credibility and continues to do so. The BBC are happy to allow this nonsense to continue. The Tories have their hands within the editorial guidelines with, I think his name's Robbie Gibb. The BBC leadership seems to be full of Tories or people who are close to the Tory party. Perhaps they even donate to the Conservative Party. That's a specific reference. But by continuing down this road, they make their own privatisation more likely. They will lose more and more talent. Andrew Marr seems to have a new lease on life. Outside of the BBC, he's found a lot more energy now. This is what the BBC does to people like him. The newsagents team, they're doing a lot better now. I still have issues with some of the stuff they come out with, especially Lewis Goodall. But they look a lot better now than they did when they were part of Newsnight. The BBC has taken away editorial control from certain journalists and certain hosts, etc. And you can't do that. You can't run a news show by having ridiculous editorial guidelines. And that's come at the cost of people being able to make informed opinions. The audience, when I watch certain BBC shows, I'm just like, what are you talking about? That's demonstrably not true. But the BBC has lost so much credibility now. It's unreal. And the sad thing is, its foreign reporting can be really, really good, but its domestic reporting is trash. But it's a really good article from Byline, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.